Hey y'all, it's me, Cody. So today for our discussion, me and Jen have two separate videos. I'm going to be the first video for you, and then Jen's going to be the second video. Our topic was collaboration, and it was Lent chapters 5 and 6, and then the Fisher and Fry article chapter 4. So our learning targets for this session are: I can collaborate with my peers to develop my understanding of the readings. I can understand how collaboration is essential in the classroom, and I can be an active participant in discussion questions. So we're going to run this very similar to Monday night's class if you are in that, or Tuesday night's class, the coaching class, where she plays the video and you'll pause and answer questions on a discussion board. So I want you to think to yourself right now, how might a lesson plan be different if you were to plan it with a team of teachers versus yourself? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. So a lot of times when I think of my lesson plans, I might have a really good idea in my head and I might start to write it down. But as I develop my lesson plan, I noticed that it's more beneficial to plan with other teachers on a team, because sometimes you might have an idea in your head and then someone else might bring something different that might work better for your classroom. Think about how that effect works in your classroom when you have your students collaborating. You know, their little brains might think one thing is one way, but there's so many different views and perspectives that their classmates can add to collaboration. So on page 148 in your Lent book, this is a disciplinary literacy book, there's the quote, "Collaborating well is an increasingly necessary skill in our modern world. Teaching it is no simple exercise and requires a range of efforts, success, establishing norms for constructive feedback, stimulating those who seem less motivated, and knowing when and how to intervene and when and how to step aside and allow students to find their way." So if you pause the video right now, I want you to think about this quote as well as the question number 1 on the discussion board. How do you facilitate collaboration in your classroom? And what do you do if a group is off task? So think of the ways right now that you are using collaboration in your classroom with your students, and what you're doing if you're noticing a group is not collaborating collectively. I want you to post that on the question 1 discussion board. So you can do that now. Okay, so hopefully you guys had a chance to post on the discussion board and people will be giving you feedback. In the book, ironically, it talks a lot about academic vocabulary, which I thought was pretty interesting due to the fact that we are learning about academic vocabulary in our inquiry projects. So when students are collaborating, it's very important that they're using the discipline-specific language. So when you're giving that vocab instruction, it needs to be individualized and specific to the discipline. For example, the word conclusion might have different contexts depending on the discipline that you're talking on it with. For example, if you are in writing a conclusion for a writing piece, it might look different than a mathematical conclusion is a statement that you might have arrived by applying a set of logical rules known as symbols, or a set of different things for that. So when you're looking at the specific words and you're asking students to use this academic vocabulary in their discussions, in their collaboration, it's really important to make sure that you're explicitly teaching that. There's the book Vocabulary is Comprehension, Getting to the Root of the Text Complexity by one of my favorite authors, Laura Robb. And it's giving you ideas on how to explicitly teach that and allowing students to be available, to have the availability of the vocabulary when they're using it in discussion. And on page 150 in Lent, there is a chart that gives you different strategies on how to use that in your classroom. So this wouldn't be the class learning about literacy in different content areas if it didn't talk about the different disciplines and how to collaborate in the different disciplines. So science almost always begins with a question, and then they observe, collect, record, analyze information to support or disapprove a hypothesis. There's lots of discussion and collaboration around science topics. It's a really easy discipline to add collaboration in. Math is a little different. Normally you might not think of math as a discipline where there's a lot of collaboration because students are needed to be practicing the skill more often. But there's a new way that teachers are moving from teaching the principles to helping the students better develop their deeper mathematical knowledge. Why did the student subtract that way? Why did they carry that number? Adding that collaboration into math is helping these students deeper their knowledge of that math studies. Social studies is a little bit easier as well as ELA. There are room for collaboration groups in both of those disciplines in a way that will help the students better access the text. So in your classroom, in the Lent book, there is a list of things that you can do to incorporate collaboration in your classroom. There's a list here that I'll let you read through so that I'm not wasting your time. You guys are able to read through these different things to help collaborate in your classroom. And then I want you to think to yourself, what might some collaborating norms look like for your classroom? I know that when you're setting up classroom norms or norms for group work, they might look different in each classroom. Just think to yourself, no need to post on a discussion board. Just think, what might it look like, the norms look like in your classroom, and how might they be different classroom to classroom? Now, like good teachers always do, we assess. So assessing collaboration, on page 168, there's a formative assessment tool for collaborative learning. It's a graph that allows the teacher to assess the students in their groups. If you go and observe the group, you can kind of see who was participating, who added the most, who wasn't, and you can assess them that way. And there's also on page 169 a student self-reflection survey for collaborative learning. I think that the self-reflection survey is a very strong idea for collaboration in the classroom. It allows the students to see how much they are collaborating or where their downfalls might be and what they need to change. So, when you are trying to add collaboration in your classroom, it's really important that you are the facilitator. You're not becoming a control freak. And now I know that's really hard for some of us teachers because collaboration can get a little silly in the classroom. And I think that there's lots of times where we want to control it in a way that we want them to get to what we're trying to see. But it's important that we are facilitating. So, for example, we're giving them open-ended questions. We're not providing them with questions where there's only going to be one answer. These are just some examples that are in the book. There's a chart that goes on longer. So if you are trying to make collaboration in your classroom and you look at this chart and you're like, wow, I was doing the things on the control freak side. What can I do to the facilitator side to make that more effective in my classroom? So you can take a look at that. Okay, so for the last thing in my section, I want us to try it ourselves. There is a part in the book where it starts to talk about seminars, and if you go to this website right here, you can click on it and it'll bring you to a website that gives you different examples of seminars, lesson plans, there's professional development on how to facilitate seminars, and there's examples from the different disciplines. It's a really good resource. I checked it out online. Let me see if I can click on it for you guys. Yes, so it brought me to this page, and there's lots of resources. There's classroom resources, there's professional development, there's videos, there's parent and after school resources, tons of resources that you can use in your classroom. So you can feel free to check that out. But what I want us to do for the next discussion question on Moodle is I want you to read this slide here. So if you go to the next slide, there's a reading from the webpage that I just brought you to. I want you to read that carefully. Then I want you to ask a question you have about the reading. So post a question that you have about that reading on the discussion board. And then I know we have 3 days in between to allow other classmates to respond to you. I want the other classmates to respond to your question. And after some of them or a few people have responded to to your question, I want you to reflect on the insights you gain from that discussion. So I don't want you to write anything else besides a question that you have about that reading. And then I want to allow time for people to write back to that question, or even write another question extending on to that person's question. And then after those 3 days, you can reflect yourself on what insights you might have gained from that discussion. You don't need to go back and repost. So I hope that my section was useful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. The whole slide will be up for you, and Jen will do the next part for you, and the discussions will be on the Moodle for you as well. Thank you guys. Bye.